Hey guys, I'm Chris Coleman. I am the chef and owner of Goodyear House and Old Town Kitchen and Cocktails down in Rock Hill, South Carolina. I'm really excited to be here today cooking with you and Freshlist. Using a ton of stuff from Freshlist to make a shrub-glazed pork belly, stewed tomatoes, summer squash, and butter beans over a bed of rice grits. If you like what you see, then come join us for dinner sometime. All right, let's get started. We're going to start with our rice grits. Rice grits are one of my favorite ingredients on earth. These are from Tidewater, which I had the pleasure to visit last year and kind of see their whole operation. And rice grits are a byproduct of milling Carolina Gold rice. Carolina Gold rice itself, lots of history in this rice. This was once the most expensive rice sold on earth. Did you know that? You knew that? It's a really high starch content rice, so it's great for risottos, pilafs, things like that. But it breaks really easily. So you get this byproduct of what's called rice grits. You can cook it just like grits, or you can cook it like a risotto. Today we're going to cook it like grits. So this is a pound. We don't need all of it. We'll use, we're cooking for 3 dishes or so. In the restaurant, we would cook, probably 5 to 10 pounds of these at a time, put them on sheet trays and put them in the walk-in to cool down. And so when you are picking some up later, you just scoop some out into a pan, bring it up with a little bit of stock or cream or butter or whatever, and be ready to go. But cooking a small amount today. So I've got some rice grits here, bay leaves, great for Carolina Gold rice, kind of a classic. We're going to put a little bit of water on these. And now, like I said, these are a really high starch content rice. So it's going to thicken up, right? Let me get my bearings here. Here we go. So the starch is just going to thicken these up, and they're going to be really creamy without having to add a lot of cream. We will finish them with a little bit of half and half and some butter at the end. But really simple, just gonna let those go, right? So bring it up to a boil, turn it down to a simmer. While that's working or getting there, I'm gonna start making stewed tomatoes, squash, and butter beans. This is kind of like a ragu, kind of like a succotash. It's honestly, this is my favorite style of cooking. It's like one pot cooking. I'm using really fresh ingredients to make something that is really homey and comforting. And that's just kind of my style of cooking in general, is just taking something that is nostalgic, taking something that is kind of homey and comforting, and turning it into something else slightly more elevated. We've got some beautiful red spring onions from Street Fair Farm here. To start, we're going to make a what's called a Trinity, which is kind of like Louisiana's answer to mirepoix, which is mirepoix onions, celery, and carrots. The Cajun tradition is onions and celery and bell pepper. So we'll use these as kind of a building block. Going to use most of the thing, but going to keep a little bit of the green for plating later. Look at that bowl. It came in there magically from nowhere. Let's get our red onions. I'm going to do a little bit of bell pepper, but not the whole thing. Again, we're not cooking for restaurant here. We're cooking for just us. Just us. You could use whatever color bell pepper you want. I like red since it's kind of a tomato stew. It won't show up as much, but red, green, yellow, orange, they all have almost the exact same flavor. So feel free to use whatever you like. A really rough, kind of large dice here. As you can see, I've got what's called a bench knife here. Got to be NC Agriculture. And I love having this by my side. You can see I've got it under, I kind of slide it under my board here when I'm not using it. And what that does, I think you've seen a couple uses already, but it allows me to kind of scoop things a lot easier than like trying to do it with my knife and possibly like, you know, nicking my hand. It's great. And I mean, honestly, like when we opened up Old Town, I bought enough of these so that every station could have one and slide it right under their board. Keeps the kitchen neat, tidy, clean, and just a little bit faster as well. A little more efficient. Celery, you know, again, making that trinity. So got all my things cut here. Got a pot on medium. Use a little bit of olive oil. Throw our veggies right in. Salt. Kosher, please. Iodized is good for like melting ice. And that's about it. So these are going to start to sweat. Let's give this guy a stir too. So the grits have come up to a simmer. And we're going to turn them down. Just kind of let them hang out a little bit. It's really, really hard to overcook those. It can be done, but it's hard to do it. All right, so got some beautiful grape tomatoes, very early season. Grape tomatoes from Tiga. You know, can't say enough about what Mindy did for this this community, Mindy and Mark. And you know, they were one of the first farms that I ever bought from. When I was at McNinch House, it was Tiga, Jamie Swafford before he was like the chef's farmer. And that's when Tim first started fishing with Charlotte Fish Company. So those were kind of my three local people that I used when I really started to kind of get into local food.
Why do you like cooking local, chef?
You know, I cook local mainly. It's one thing for me. Like, you know, flavor's great, yes, and you know, seasonality is fantastic. But for me, it's about supporting our local economy. You know, like these are people. And you know, you can meet the people who make are growing your ingredients. You get to know them, you meet their kids, talk to them about their struggles and their successes, and for me, that's just really, really special. You don't do that when a box comes in from, you know, a big box truck. So you have no idea where it came from. With this, it's like, I know that I'm helping to put food on the table, and buy backpacks for their kids and that kind of stuff. So it's important.
How long have you been cooking in Charlotte, chef?
Oh man, so I started in restaurants when I was 14 years old, and I'm 39 now, so 25 years. But I was a busboy and then worked in the takeout room, and then they would have me expedite on weekends. And this is at a fish camp, which is a very like North Carolina thing, in Huntersville, called Captain's Galley. And I loved it. I fell in love with like the kind of chaos of the kitchen, like the organized kind of chaos. And when I was 19, decided to go to culinary school. Got a job at McNinch House. Was named executive chef when I was 21. Ran that place for a while. So I've been cooking for 20 years. I've been in restaurants for 25. So long time. Veggies are sweating. Tomatoes are cut. We're going to do the squash last. Like, we want to kind of fold that squash in at the very end of that stew process, because squash has a lot of water content. And if you put it in too early, it's going to water out our stew, and then the squash itself is going to be kind of gross and mealy. So we're going to cook this just until it kind of wilts a smidge. So this is going. While this is sweating, and before we add these, we're going to make a little flavor booster for the stew. So I've got 3-9 brand chili paste, which I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite things. Kind of this and like sambal, and then like chili crisp and those kind of things add so much flavor to a dish. And we've got some Miso Master Chickpea Tamari, Miso Master Miso Master Chickpea Miso, Miso Master Tamari, a little bit of fish sauce in here. We're gonna combine all of this into our blender, make it really smooth, and then this is gonna be folded into our stew at the end to give it a little bit of umami and depth. So about a tablespoon of the chickpea miso, about a half of a teaspoon of tamari, and another half teaspoon of fish sauce. We're going to use about a third of this jar of chili. This is fermented chilies, a little bit of soybean oil, a little bit of MSG, which is a great flavor enhancer, but not much else going on in this. And again, umami, you know, I think it's pretty well documented now. We all know it's like that fifth sense. It's that sense of earthiness, of funkiness. For a stew like this, it kind of gives the feeling that it's been cooking all day. And we got a little bit of spice in this. So we're going to blend it really smooth. A little bit of water. What we're left here with is kind of like a paste almost, but a lot smoother than it was coming out of the jar, right? Now we won't need all of this for this one dish, but the leftovers are great, kind of stirred into rice with a little bit of scrambled eggs for breakfast the next day. And it's these types of things that restaurants make to kind of stir into dishes to finish things off and give it kind of little flavor boosters that home cooks don't generally mess with. But this is how you bring your home cooking to the next level. So what I tell folks all the time about the differences between home cooking and restaurant cooking is, number one, we cheat, things like this. Number two, we use a lot more salt than you do. Number three, we finish everything with acid. And there's lots of reasons behind all of that, right? It's all about balancing flavor. It's all about bringing things together harmoniously. Acid does that. Acid also makes heavy things taste lighter. It kind of tricks your brain. Salt is a flavor enhancer. Shouldn't taste the salt. But there should be just enough there where it's like, is this salty? I don't know. Is this salty? So that's kind of what we're doing. Our veggies here have sweat. This Trinity veg. Throw in the tomatoes. We're going to throw in a little bit of water on this. You could certainly use stock or whatever you want. A little bit of water is going to help those tomatoes start to break down a smidge more. A little more salt. You can see I'm salting at every step, and there's science behind that. It breaks down whatever you're cooking. It draws moisture out, so then it starts to cook and really get going. What I love most about Charlotte's cooking scene is that everyone can kind of do their own thing. And everyone can kind of be themselves. There's been a lot of talk about, does Charlotte have a dish? Does Charlotte have like an identity? And I kind of like the fact that we don't. Like, I'm a Charlotte guy. And so I've grown up here. It's a city of transplants. And everyone's brought their own little cultures and their own little cuisines and their own techniques. And it's great. I don't think we need like a Charlotte signature dish, because I think that there's a lot of chefs doing really, really cool things, and everyone just kind of plays together. So that's probably my favorite. This is a city where, when Greg and Sam both get nominations in one year, the whole city celebrates. It's not, there's none of us in the background like.
Don't forget about Salud.
Oh, and Salud, yeah. So yeah, which I know that they were surprised. But I love Jason. I love Salud. I love what they're doing. So yeah, Good stuff, man. It's a very collaborative city, which I like a lot. All right, so we're not going to throw these in yet, but talk a little bit about Zephyr Squash from Boy and Girl. It's his variety of summer squash, pretty mild in flavor, but delicious nonetheless. Squash doesn't have to be smothered in cheese or mayonnaise or battered and deep fried to be delicious. I feel like squash is one of those veggies that home cooks honestly do cook a lot more than like chefs do. And I don't know why. Squash is delicious. There's a ton of farms in our area that grow it. It's kind of one of those staple backyard vegetables. But yeah, we're not doing anything fancy with this, just some kind of semicircles here. We want this finished, tomato stew to be a little chunky, to be a little rustic. You can see I'm not doing any kind of delicate knife work today. It should have some texture to it that stands up to the creaminess of the rice grits. So as a Charlotte native, I think what's been most inspirational is kind of what I touched on with just the scene as a whole. It's a very collaborative community, I was lucky enough to come up in the kind of early to mid 2000s when we still had some OGs, and they're still in kitchens now, but like Gene Briggs was uptown and Tim Grudy was uptown, and Bruce was, kind of expanding with good food from just having Barrington. And then you had guys like Mark Jacksina and Jamie Lynch who were kind of bursting onto the scene. And
were they before you?
So Mark was at Mark started Lulu on Central, which was probably the best restaurant Charlotte's ever had. It was a fantastic restaurant, and Jeff Bragg was in his kitchen with him then, and now Jeff's running Common Market. And then Jamie had opened Five Church in my last 2 years at McNinch, and was already talking about expanding into Charleston and doing some stuff at that point, which is really, really cool. Right. So, and then you had guys like Greg was doing stuff down on Rock Hill with the Yoke. Nick Daniels was at Wood and Vine, and Ben Philpott was at Block and Grinder, and so it was kind of like, Clark was open in Heirloom. So there was a lot of kind of percolation of the next, there was the OGs who were cooking, then there was the next level of cooks, and I was kind of lumped into them. But it was great. It was just very collaborative and very kind of, we all rooted for each other. So that was super inspirational. I'd be probably remiss if I didn't mention the Culinary Guild, Piedmont Culinary Guild. I'm a member of and on the board for, and that's just a great group of like-minded chefs, farmers, artisans, kind of all working together to do what we can for the scene. So yeah, good stuff. I guess for me, it's all about people, right? I keep mentioning every time you ask a question, it's like what inspires me, it's people. Yeah.
What do you think the challenges were for the OG chefs, Gene, Bruce, versus your challenges in this day and age?
Sure. So these OG chefs were really the first people to kind of break down the walls and say Charlotte's not just a steak town. You had, Tim was instrumental. Tim Grudy was instrumental in starting Matthews Farmers Market. And then he kind of really, I'd say, was probably the first true farm to fork chef in town, and was buying a ton of stuff from Mimosa, straight from the market. I think that the challenges were sourcing. The challenges were a dining public that wasn't quite ready for a chef-driven concept. And so they just kind of kept their head down, kept working, and just kept at it, and really kind of opened the doors for a Johnson & Wales to move to Charlotte, which really kind of helped usher in all this stuff. So, for me today, it's a lot easier to source locally, especially, you know, with like what Freshlist is doing, helping us to kind of, instead of having to place 20 orders a week, I now place like 6. You know, there's one with Freshlist and then 5 to some farms and stuff that I still continue to work with on a personal level. But, you know, I remember when I took over at the Dunhill and we were opening up the Asbury, this is before Freshlist, and I would place legitimately like some weeks 18 to 20 different local orders to get what we wanted in, and that's a full day and a half, 2 days of work just to place orders. So having, you know, like you guys kind of help us to fill the gaps is huge. All right, so the stew, the tomatoes are starting to break down. We're gonna splash a little water on this just so it doesn't dry out, right? Let's taste these rice grits for doneness. We're gonna go a little bit of half and half. Coleman Creamery, if you guys aren't buying this, it's like ridiculous, you know? It's really, really good. When we first opened the Marriott uptown with Stoke and Coco, we were buying the Coleman Creamery chocolate milk in little guys to put inside the coffee shop, and I think that the staff drank most of it. So we're gonna go a little bit of butter in there eventually. And then we're just gonna kind of let these guys hang out. And what that's gonna do is those rice grits will continue to kind of thicken up a smidge, but they'll also absorb everything we put in. So the salt, the pepper, the butter, a little bit of cream. And what you'll get is something that's akin to a stone ground grit, but, you know, made from rice. We haven't added a lot. We don't want to overpower the flavor of the rice itself. It's such a unique, kind of almost nutty flavor that we don't want to overshadow with adding too much stuff. That's why I honestly like to cook these in water like we did instead of like a chicken stock or something, because we want the flavor of the rice to show up. Stew, butter beans, lima beans, cooked ahead of time just in some salted boiling water, little squash, another pinch of salt, good tablespoon of our chili booster, and like I mentioned before, squash is a kind of a watery, you know, it's got a high water content. So we're going to cook this until that squash just starts to soften up a bit and releases some of that water to kind of create our sauce for the dish without getting mushy. You know, squash can be kind of mealy and mushy if you overcook it. So one of our favorite ways, and something that we've done with summer squashes before at the restaurant, is, you know, with like a Zephyr or patty pan, is to cut it into pieces about this big, sear it on our flat top, and then chill it down. And then at service, we just take a little bit of that squash, throw it into a pan, into a warm oven to heat it through, but it's not cooked. It's just seared hard, and then warmed through, and you get a great crunch. All right, so that is going. We're gonna make a glaze now. So pork belly, I cooked ahead of time before today, and then pressed it overnight. So it has, so it's been compressed. This is a really cool cut because it is a bone-in pork belly with the skin still attached. So it has like a little chicharron crust to it. And slow roasted this about 300 degrees for about 2.5 hours. Cranked up the heat for the last little bit to get that crispy crust on top, but you can see the bones are still there. Cooked it until it's an internal temp of 210, which is about where you want for barbecue, like for pulled pork or whole hog barbecue. You know, the fat really starts to break down. The muscles get really soft and shreddable at about 205 or so. So 210 is perfect for pulled pork consistency. With this method, God, you hear the crunch of the skin. Sorry, Matt. Look at that. It's beautiful, right? And what we have here now are pork belly ribs. But look how tender the meat is. Like it's, you know, it's gonna fall apart if I mess with it too much. So we're gonna glaze it in Jamie's 2-in-the-bush shrub. Shrub is like a drinking vinegar almost. And what I love about what Jamie does is he's using actual fruits. Sorry, I'm talking about a mouthful. It's real rude. To make these, so you get that full fruit flavor. This is a berry flavored one. And great with like vodka, great with tequila, great on its own if you're abstaining. But the sugars in this are gonna caramelize and we can glaze this pork in that without having to add sugar. But then the vinegar in it, or the vinegariness of it, the tartness of it really starts to kind of, or balances out the caramelized sugar. Bouncing around a little bit here, but our squash is looking really beautiful. Just gonna test one piece of it. And that's like perfect texture. It's a little crunchy. Yeah, that's where we want it to be. So that wasn't that long. I mean, you could see I threw it in the pot and it was, you know, maybe 5 minutes at most. We're gonna pull it off. The heat, the miso, a little bit of that tamari fish sauce. It's super deep. I mean, it tastes like it's been cooking all day because of those little cheat codes. So we're gonna do the shrub. Just do a touch of butter. And when that comes to a simmer, we'll throw our pork in and start to kind of glaze that down. All right, so our shrub and butter mixture here has come to a boil. So I'm gonna put these pork belly ribs, as we called them, right into it. And we're just gonna let that reduce. We'll flip them occasionally. We'll talk about these herbs for a second that we've picked. Fish mint from Mai. Really, really interesting. It is exactly what it proclaims to be. It is minty, it's a little peppery, but it's abrasive like fish. Like it tastes like fish. And I like that. I'm not afraid of it. You know, and the reason that I like it is just like sneaking in a little fish sauce into our chili paste mixture here. It's depth, it's umami. It lightens a dish. You know, this is a dish that could be extremely heavy, right? With the pork and the creamy grits and the stew, but little cheats like a little bit of fish flavor, a little fish flavor, the shrub, the vinegariness, the tartness of the shrub really helps to lighten up everything. Like we spoke about, when you add, you know, vinegar, when you add umami, it makes things a little lighter tasting than what they should be. So we're gonna take just a little bit of this fish mint. I'm gonna do a little chiffonade here. Chiffonade is a very thin kind of slice. You can smell it coming off the knife. Like when the knife goes through it, it's like, again, that kind of peppery, minty, little abrasive flavor right into our stew. Onion, like sweet onion blossom here. Again, a little chiffonade. Little chive. The chive is from Small City. All right, I'm gonna move this so we can get a good picture here. You can see the shrub is really kind of reduced down to a glaze. All right, and because it's glazed, we're exactly where I want it to be now, but I'm not ready to serve quite yet. I'm gonna pop this in a 250-degree oven. Yep, so you can always do this at home, you know, like get a dish to a certain point where you're happy with it, or a component of a dish, and then have a warm oven, somewhere between 225 and 250, and it's gonna keep your dish warm. And then when you're ready to eat, you just sit down and you go for it. You know, I remember when I first got into cooking at home and I was like, you know, probably 14 years old, trying to cook for my family and trying to make sure everything was done at the right time. And then I'd be yelling like, sit down, it's ready, sit down, you know, and now I'm like, okay, that can chill. That can chill, like little cheats, you know. Cutting some extra chive here for some garnish. You know, again, kind of talking about the difference between home cooks and restaurant cooks, or at least at Goodyear House, we love to garnish with just fresh herbs. It really brightens and elevates a dish, just like salt or acid. This really kind of helps. It's visually striking, but then also when you get little pops of, you know, chive, which is kind of soft and onion. This is burnet, which is kind of cucumbery flavor. So especially with the flavors of squash and tomato and peas, very, very evocative of summer. It just kind of brings the whole thing together. Okay, so I folded in that fish mint and that spring onion. We're gonna go a little lemon juice. And then we'll taste one more time for salt. And we'll be ready to go. All right, so we have all three elements of our dish here. If you remember, we let our rice just kind of hang out after we add the butter and the cream and stuff. So it's a beautiful kind of texture here now. The rice is still, it's like a risotto. The rice is still got a little bit of tooth to it. But it's really creamy and delicate. So we're gonna kind of spread this around. We've got our stew here that we're gonna put right in the middle. And I mean, stop right here and you've got a beautiful vegetarian dish. I mean, minus the fish sauce. You take the fish sauce out of your chili, you know, paste here, and you got a beautiful vegetarian dish here. A couple of tweaks, you know, no cream, no butter, and you can make this vegan all day long. So that right there is a perfect lunch or perfect dinner for me 9 times out of 10. But you know, since we're doing something a little luxurious and a little elegant, we're gonna add a big pork belly rib, kind of offset. So now we garnish, chives, here, there, and everywhere. The salad burnet, kind of also here, there, and everywhere. We're gonna garnish the pork belly itself with something, you know, we're big believers in texture. And we have a lot of little things that we call crispies. So it'll be garlic crispies or fish crispies or whatever. This is peanut crispies. So this is peanuts, benet seeds, Aleppo, and a little bit of crispy garlic. Right on our pork. Do a little bit of olive oil just for some shine. A couple little pops of onion flour. And there we go. So we have shrub glazed pork belly chop with stewed tomatoes, squash, and butter beans over Tidewater rice grits. Oh man. Okay, I'm gonna talk with my mouth full because it's really rude. But what sets it off, that crispy skin on that pork, like, it held up even through like reheating it. And a reheat, you know, you can roast this and do just like I did. Roast your pork belly, press it overnight, wrap it tin foil. I did plastic wrap and then tin foil, and the plastic wrap seals in the juices. And so then I reheated it 250 for about 30 minutes or so, glazed it, and it's perfectly warm throughout, and the skin stayed really crispy throughout all of that. So it's like texture. This style of food is my favorite food because it is approachable, it is simple, it is nostalgic, it is comforting, very technique driven, you know, something that we were talking about a little bit off camera. You know, there's a lot of technique that goes into this, and a lot of thought that goes into this, but when you set this down in front of a diner at a restaurant, hours and hours and hours of work and thought have gone into it, but it looks like something that their mom served. It looks like something that grandma put on the dinner table. And that, to me, is what dining is all about. It's people, it's family, it's friends, just sharing a great meal together. And so that's why I love to do what I do.